Thank you, everybody, for coming to the Aaron Torres Podcast YouTube page. If you could do me a quick favor, see that little subscribe button at the bottom of your screen? Go ahead, click that subscribe button. Really does help our channel grow, our audience grow, and I really do appreciate it more than you know. So click that subscribe button. Appreciate your support. Now, here's the video that you came here for. All right, everybody, I'm back. Good to be back. So want to go ahead and continue our off-season college hoops coaching grade series. Earlier this week, we did start with the University of Kentucky, talked Mark Pope, the successes of his first offseason, handed out a grade. And as I've said a couple times over the course of the last couple weeks, we're going to be doing these for all the major programs. We're going to do them for Kansas and North Carolina and Duke and UConn and Arizona and Arkansas and all the big programs in college hoops. Today, though, do want to go to the Big Ten. Do want to focus on a program that we talked about a lot during the early portion of April and maybe even a little bit of late March. That is the Indiana Hoosiers. No doubt that it was a very important offseason for Mike Woodson. And let me just say this. No, I'm going to spoil the grade portion of the conversation right now, but I think you could say that Mike Woodson had about as good of an offseason as you possibly could have had. So let's go ahead and break it down. And listen, bluntly, look, we know this was a big offseason for my guy Mike Effin Woodson. By the way, you can see on the scroller down below, Torres on Indiana on Twitter. If you're an Indiana fan, make sure to go ahead and follow that page for all the late-breaking Indiana news, coverage from me, et cetera, et cetera. But with Mike Woodson, listen, it was no secret. This was a big offseason for him. I thought during the regular season, the hot seat talk felt a little bit unfair to me. This is a guy that in his first two seasons made the NCAA tournament, won a game in the NCAA tournament in each of his first two seasons. Now, one of them was in a play-in, date-in, first four setting, but it doesn't change the fact that, got Indiana to the tournament 2 years in a row, but it's also no doubt that last season there was regression. I think some of it was a little bit overrated. We went through it in the earlier part of the spring where a lot of the losses were to good teams. You lose to Purdue twice. You lose. There's really only one or two really kind of head-scratching losses. But regardless, Mike Woodson needed a big offseason. I think he did about as well as he could have done. Again, I'm spoiling the grade part of this a little bit. But first off, when it comes to any offseason, okay, part of it is, unless you're taking over a brand new program like a Pat Kelsey at Louisville, like a Mark Pope at Kentucky, John Calipari at Arkansas, at the end of the day, part of it is just about, in this era, retaining the players that you want to retain. It is no guarantee anywhere in college hoops that you are going to be able to retain the players that you want to. And Indiana, to its credit, did a very good job. Now, you lose Khalil Ware, but that's to the NBA draft. You lose a couple guys to graduation. That happens at every program in college basketball. But the guys that you wanted returned, headlined by Malik Reneau. Really love what he did this past season. 15 points a game, 6 boards. And I do think for Malik Reneau, it was a little bit of an underrated part of the conversation. He hit 33% from behind the three-point arc. Now, we're going to get to quite a bit of conversation about Indiana and three-point shooting. I'm not here to say that, they're the 2006 Golden State Warriors, because they weren't, and that was part of the offseason. But I think it's worth noting, 6'9" power forward, 6'9" center, proves he can hit 33% from three on 142 attempts. What that says to me is, with a little bit of a step up, a little bit of work in the offseason, he can be a very productive three-point shooter in 2024, 2025, in addition to everything he does around the basket. Beyond him, Trey Galloway, interesting season. Statistically, the scoring was up. The problem was the three-point shooting was way down. And that's something, and again, we're going to get into some of the shooting stuff here in a minute, but that is something that clearly needs to be improved, as he averages 11 points per game. But here's the crazy part. Goes to averaging 11 points per game. But the three-point shooting percentage goes from 46% down to 26%. And so you hope, again, with a little bit of work in the offseason, that this is a guy that in time can, listen, you don't need to be at 46% again, but can you get back to 32, 33, 34, 36%, 37%? All of a sudden, you are a very valuable player in the Big Ten. And then the other big returnee, you can't understate it. Mackenzie Mbako coming back for a sophomore year at Indiana is huge. averaged 12 points per game. Another guy averaged right around 33% three-point shooting last year. It wasn't great. It wasn't perfect. And listen, on the one hand, I get it. This was a kid that you brought into Indiana expecting to be a one and done. But at the same time, everybody runs their own race. Nobody's perfect. Not everybody is going to live up to and exceed expectations. And I think for a freshman in the Big Ten, 12 points per game, 33% three-point shooting from a 6'8", 6'9" forward is pretty darn good. So again, now it's on him to get better in the offseason. But those are three really nice building blocks to start with. And we haven't even gotten to what my boy Mike F. and Woodson did in the portal. Goodness gracious, did this guy go to work. So first of all, the biggest name, literally and figuratively, Oumar Ballo from Arizona. And I said at the time that he committed, listen, I thought the conversation about him being the best player in the portal, it was a little bit overstated. But you also can't overstate the impact that he has on both ends of the court and the experience that he brings to Indiana this offseason. 13 points per game, 10 boards per game, about a block and a half per game at Arizona. I know the limitations. He basically plays within 5 feet from the basket. He doesn't stretch the floor. He's not a three-point shooter. He has never even attempted, I believe, a three-point shot in his entire college career. So I get it. I know that everybody in 2024 wants the 6'10" guy that can shoot threes. That's not who he is, but that's okay. You know why? Because he's a veteran, because he's experienced, because he dominates the paint on both ends of the floor. And I think there's something to be said. You can't understate the fact that you do still need those guys in this era in the Big Ten. I know we're going to a spacing 3-and-D, whatever you want, whatever you want to call it. I understand we're going to that style of play. But in the Big Ten, you still need big bodies to bang. Zach Edey's gone at Purdue, but guess what? They got the Will Berg kid who's been there. They got the Daniel Jacobson kid who dominated for Team USA. Like, you still need 7-footers in the Big Ten that can dominate the paint and control the paint on both ends. That's who Oumar Ballo is. Beyond him, I love the guards, man. Miles Rice, we've talked a ton about him. I think he's the exact kind of veteran, adult that Indiana needs in that locker room. Oumar Ballo as well, by the way. Got a chance to talk to Oumar a little bit at the West Regional when Arizona was in Los Angeles this spring. Mature kid, adult kid, sweet kid, honestly. But you could just tell he's been through the wars, been to a Final Four. This is Oumar Ballo I'm talking about now. But Miles Rice, it's the same. We all know the backstory. We all know frankly, let's just be honest. Indiana's new point guard had a scare with cancer. Terrifying stuff, not trying to make any light or fun of it. But I bring it up because that's a kid who has been through some stuff. And I think you see it when he plays. Mature beyond his years. A guy that this past season elevated, he helped. I'm not saying he's the only guy, but elevated a Washington State team that historically, it had been one of the more struggling programs at the then Power 5. Now I guess we got to call it the Power 4. But that was a program that was down. And this kid comes in as a freshman that did not play the year before because of obviously major medical issues, averages 15 points and 4 assists per game. And oh, by the way, he's another one. Average about 28% shooting from 3. That's not going to get the job done. That's not going to get you to where you want to go, whatever it is. But you mean to tell me a kid that overcame everything that he's overcome over the last couple of years isn't working on the jump shot, doesn't know that he needs to be better? And so he's the exact kind of point guard that you need. Cannon Carlisle, we talked a lot about him when he committed, played it at Stanford. Listen, I know some of the people that were on that Stanford coaching staff. They raved about him. He went through, the school had some issues with whatever. The bottom line is he didn't play until December, basically got thrown into Pac-12 play as soon as he came back. And in game 3, he had 28 against Arizona. So this was a kid that's comfortable playing at that level. And I think his best basketball is ahead. He's a kid, NBA athleticism, NBA upside, another one that needs to work on the three-point shooting. But again, if we're being honest, if we're having an honest conversation, he also was a freshman last year in major college basketball that averaged 11.5 points per game on 32% three-point shooting. So yes, he, along with Trey Galloway, along with Malik Renew, along with Mackenzie Mbako, all these guys need to work on the three-point shooting. But if he goes from 32% to 35, 35.5%, we might be talking about him as an NBA draft prospect at this time next year. So you add those guys. Last big transfer, that's a big one. Luke Goody, obviously from Illinois, played in the Big Ten, shot 39% from three. So he is now the guy that you're going to count on to space the floor with all of these other guys. It's also worth noting, obviously, you signed Bryson Tucker, the McDonald's All-American as well. And so when I look at this team, listen, let's call a spade a spade. I think bluntly, I'm not going to beat around the bush. In my opinion, this is probably the most talented team on paper in the Big Ten going into 2024, 2025. Now, you could argue Purdue has more experience. Purdue beat them a couple times last year. Purdue is losing Zach Edey, but, Fletcher Lawyer's back. Braden Smith is back. Miles Colvin's back. I get it. But in terms of talent on the floor, I don't think there's any doubt that Indiana is on another level. Now, the question, of course, how is Mike Woodson going to use those guys? If you want to play Umar Ballo 32 minutes a game, then it's going to change like what everybody else does. But if he's playing 18 minutes a game, maybe 25 to 30 against teams that have a true back to the basket center, and now all of a sudden you're playing Malik Renew at the 5, you're playing Mackenzie Mbako at the 5, you have 4 guards at any given moment. I'm not saying it's how it should be all the time, but it's hard for me not to look at this team and look at the talent upgrade and say this team has a chance to be special. So ultimately it is on Mike Woodson. That's, what you pay a coach millions of dollars a year for, to figure out a way to best deploy these players and best deploy all of the talent that he has at his disposal. But when I look at this team on paper, there just are not many teams anywhere in college basketball, let alone in the Big Ten, that I believe are as talented as them. And again, it comes down to how does Mike Woodson use all of the talent? But then beyond that, can all these guys get better over the course of the summer? By the way, that's the question at every single college hoops program in America. Are you getting better over the summer? Is that three-point shot improving for Cannon Carlisle, for Miles Rice, for Mackenzie Mbako? Because on paper, I don't see a lot of weaknesses. They have a lot of size, but they have versatile big guys that can play small if you want to play small. Can play big with Ballo at the 5 if you want to play big. Can play 4 guards. Can have multiple shooters if Trey Galloway can just get a little bit more consistent. Really like this team. Don't want to oversell it, but I believe on paper they are the most talented team in the Big Ten, and I'll take it a step further. As far as an off-season grade, let's go ahead and give them – got to give them an A. You got to give them an A. Retained all the guys he wanted to retain. Had as good of a portal run as anybody. Credit Mike Effin Woodson. A for the offseason. Now it's time to figure out how all the pieces fit together. If you enjoyed this video, do me a quick favor. Make sure to subscribe to the Aaron Torres Pod YouTube channel. Still talking a lot of college basketball. We'll get into more football as the time goes on. Indiana fans, by the way, make sure to subscribe to our Indiana page, Torres on Indiana. And oh, by the way, if you want one of those Mike Effin Woodson shirts, go to AaronTorresOnline.com.